Your recent book, The Unspoken, explores the intersections between language and silence.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, we have a lot of percussions.
Yeah.
That's reality. The percussive reality surrounds us, inundates us.
You want me to start with a story?
Yes.
All right, I'll start with a story. As soon as I get the cue from our producer, director, cinematographer, sound guy, key grip, best boy, everything.
Best boy.
Okay, so listening to the percussion of the rain reminds me of how I got into poetry and film at the very beginning. A friend of mine, Roberto Bedoya, told his boyfriend, Danny O'Neill, that I seemed to be a likely suspect. Danny was working for WNYC television. He was doing Dance in America, and he thought that there should be poetry in America too, poetry on TV. So he came up to me, and let me tell you, at that point, TV to me was the enemy. You know, this is the whole. Why isn't poetry the world's greatest language? Because of TV. So I reached back to slug him, but as I was coming forward, this is a true story, I realized, wait a second, what if the poetry was on the television and people were clicking through this and, oh, I've waited my whole life to see a poem on TV, so let's do it. So I said, okay, let's do it. And Danny sent off for a grant. I didn't know that we had received it till 6 months after he died. He died of AIDS. We're talking about 1984, maybe, you know. The AIDS plague was just devastating. My friends and the population, and but I wrote this poem on my last visit to him, and it's called Rain. So now finally the thrilling conclusion of this little story, Rain. I was locking up my bicycle to go up to visit Danny, and this poem came to me. How I love to stand in the driving rain, blowing my horn at the Holland Tunnel. That's it.
Here's my haiku about rain. Reading in the rain, a good book is destroyed by how good it is.
Ooh, how good it is.
Brother, I wanted to ask you, because you brought up this marvelous topic of bringing poems to TV, what about the medium is the message? How much does the medium, especially interrupted by commercials, how much does that subsume any attempt at the sublime?
It subsumes it. You know, I mean,
yeah.
But it's the reality. When we made the United States of Poetry, it was, Mark Pellington directed it and Josh Blum produced it. We got a big grant from PBS to do this, ITVS, the independent branch. And we had one rule for doing this poetry film series, and that was get it on TV. This independent arm of PBS was known for making brilliant documentaries, brilliant films, but they weren't, you couldn't put them on, they were too good for TV. They were just not ready. We wanted to make this work, and it did. It worked. We got the cover of TV Guide, which back in those days was really something. We're talking the mid-90s now.
Yeah.
And why did we get the cover of TV Guide? Because Johnny Depp was one of the poets who was in it. I said, we can't use Johnny Depp. And they said, I was outvoted. He was a friend of Pellington's. And of course, he loves Jack Kerouac.
Yeah.
So we needed Jack Kerouac in this. And so who better to be Jack Kerouac than Johnny Depp? It's the only poem in the whole series that someone other than the poet performs. But it got us on the cover of TV Guide.
Okay, so what does slip through that, veil?
You know, I wish you could, you know, in poetry, in the oral tradition, and I guess in the text tradition, you can do what you want to do, and that's the end of it. You can do it on video as well, in digital. You know, you in the I know eventually this will be the poet will be the person with a camera. In this transitional time, you know, we have our own, you know, we've got Petra here to do the camera and stuff, and you produce this, and you know, so you work as a team. That's the beginning of it. You know, you work as a team to make this. It's different from the way you write a poem. When you write a poem, you can do whatever you want. Put the words around in a concrete fashion, throw them up and down, change the spellings, whatever you want to do. But when it comes to TV, you're limited. It's not like you have more choices. You have fewer because you're limited to what lens we're using, whether it's raining or not. You know, and then when you get it on TV, it's got to go through this whole vetting process of being appropriate. If you want to go that way, you know, poetry films, though, with the internet, you just throw them up there. You know, you send them into Berlin to the Zebra Poetry Film Festival and see if you get to go to Berlin that year. You know, so.
Did you have to make any creative compromises in terms of the actual making of United States of Poetry?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know, I mean, like I say, first it's a team. You got to acknowledge that you're not going to win everything.
Yeah.
I mean, what it was great was to have a team that had a poet on the team.
Yeah.
You know that,
yeah.
And the rule that I had was that everything in the show had to be okay with the poet. Mm. You know, so you know, you'd go to somebody like Shavuot Miłosz, and he'd say, "You're the film people. Do it the way you want it." And you go to a poet, young poet like Ruth Foreman, and she'd say, "I will fax you treatment right now." You know. So in those days there were fax machines. So she faxed us the treatment, and that's what we used. Had to rent a Lexus, but it's called Stoplight Politics. You know. Miłosz, Mark went up to him and said he had this beautiful little poem called A Song, and we met him in his house in Berkeley up in the hills. Gorgeous place, beautiful garden, and we filmed him in the garden. But Mark had this idea that this little poem, which includes the line, "The man I used to be no longer embarrasses me." So, and of course, Miłosz and the history of him in the war and in Poland, it's a deep meaning for him.
Yeah.
Because he lived through it and his friends. So anyway, Mark says, this poem should be heard by everybody. We got to take it out to, put it on billboards. And people will see it, and then we'll have it projected on a TV screen at a drive-in movie, and a train comes in behind it, and the people are watching it. And Miłosz looks at him and says, "That is a terrible idea." So he did get it in finally. He did have that.
Now Miłosz, in one of his poems, said that what has no shadow has no strength to live, and I'm getting to know you, Bob, through your visit here to Prague, and I was privy to learn yesterday that your father committed suicide when you were 2 years old. You lived through the tragic death of your wife, and I mean, how much can you take shadow and transform it? How much can your heart break to get bigger?
Oh, that's a great question. I hate it in interviews where the guy says, "That's a great question." But you know, that is a great question. And of course, unanswerable because I live in the shadow. You know, I think the thing that comes immediately to mind is wayang, the shadow puppets in Indonesia, in Bali and Java, where I was lucky enough to be last year showing the film Language Matters, and watching how art is created by shadows. These beautifully painted shadow puppets, but you never see the colors. you know, because all you see is the shadows as the puppets on these sticks come at the screen, and the shadow and it's growing, and it's in Bali where I was. You know, the play of shadow and light, of life and death, is just inherent in everyday life. And you know, I got a poem for my father, and I got a lot of poems about Elizabeth and the children. You know, I mean, everybody. You know, life is sorrow. You know, life is suffering, as you know, as we learn. And but you can talk to it, and you can listen to it, and you know, like Miłosz said, that's, you know, that's, without it, there is no poetry.
Now, I love, and I really revel in Rilke's idea as rendered in a translation by Robert Bly. You know, take your well-disciplined strengths and stretch them between two opposing poles, because inside human beings is where God learns. So I started by now quoting Miłosz, who you mentioned in the United States of Poetry, but now let's leap to another figure, Bukowski, and he said that, you know, I was blessed with a crappy life. And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, oh, he's just being flippant and drunk, as he normally is. But in another context, I understood, because I believe also that any poem, any, you know, powerful work of art is just a living, throbbing arrow, but we're moving targets. And the first time I heard that statement, it just kind of glanced off my side. But I showed it to some of my students, and suddenly it hit me in the bullseye. I was like, yes, I was blessed with a crappy life. So respond to that in the sense of how many times when something sorrowful does happen, are you also able to say, well, okay, that's good fuel for poetry?
You know, Luce, you know, you said that you were first struck by the flippancy of the remark, and I think that's, you know, that's everything right there. You know, I mean, there is, you know, eventually you pulled the great wisdom from it. You know, and Bukowski, you know, you say, flippant and drunk like he always was. Well, flippant and drunk like he always was, like, you know, Libo always was. You know, like Rumi always was. You know, within, you know, if you, it's a poem disguised as flippancy and drunk. We're talking about somebody specific and a specific type of poetry, but I think it's a real thing that you know, when the poem is camouflaged and real life is the camouflage, that's the art. You know, there's to me, that's really where the art is. That's the art, and it's the art of today. Wasn't the art back for the troubadours. You know, they had a different kind of sense of language. I think it was how orality evolves, which it definitely does. You know, to you know, the African American tradition, which came from Africa, you know, was, you know, rendered differently when enslaved people were sold. You know, when they brought the ships into New Orleans, the first thing you do is you sell the enslaved people by wholesale. You can't sell them individually, so they broke it up into 12 groups, and put the leftovers were in the 12th group. You know, just pick them over there, we'll sell them off cheap. And that's where we get the dozens. The dozens, which are the, you know, the put down rhymes, you know, come from that horror story. And you start making poetry and start making flippancy out of that, you're doing it. And of course that leads you all the way up to the great toasts of the African American tradition, like Shine swam on. You know, when Shine, who's one of the workers on the Titanic, is approached by the rich people and the beautiful women and everybody to help them escape, and he says, you know, jump in the water and swim like me. You know, so, and then of course the great hip hop people. Yeah.
Now, your documentary Language Matters. In talking about it, you had a phrase that I really found resonated with me a lot, and it was simply this. You talked about the inner life vanishes when a language is lost. What do you mean by that? What is that inner life that is captured in a given language that's lost?
Yeah, it's what is lost is a complete consciousness. What is lost is a way of looking at the world. You know, the cure for cancer is in a language that's disappeared. How do we go about finding it now? You know, people know what leaves they are. They are named after what they cure, and it's the language is an encyclopedia that is lived in. But when it goes, all that knowledge goes. You know, and it's natural for a language to be born, to live and evolve, and then to die. As a matter of fact, languages are forever changing, so there's only the moment what a language is just a snapshot of that moment of that language, because it's coming from this and going to that. You know, but the problem is that language has never been lost like they are right now. And of course, we can say digital is at the root of this. That you know, both the diaspora of the cultures spreads faster now. You know, I work with the Endangered Language Alliance in New York City, and we've documented over 200 endangered languages in New York City. So you know, we're at the point now where Mexicans are coming up speaking Mixtec who don't speak Spanish, right? And they come to New York, so when they learn English as a second language, they don't. They learn Spanish as a second language because they're embedded in the Spanish culture, and to get along in the urban setting, the first thing they have to do is learn how to speak Spanish to live in New York. You know? So everything is up for grabs right now.
That's something that you also mentioned in that same interview regarding the documentary Language Matters. You have a term, I think you coined it, bully languages.
Bully languages. Well, I'm speaking one right now. The worst. And you know, we made this film called Kansai, which is a word from the Boro language in India. So you get to hear each of these 50 endangered languages in the mother tongue. You hear it and you see the text for it. But then it's translated, and of course it's translated into English, and it becomes the poem. The idea is that 50 languages collaborate on a single poem, but you read the poem in the in the language that to me is what is also causing the problem. So it's the answer. Everybody gets to read this, but it's the problem because it causes the extinction of these. So it's a conundrum that we've got to deal with. I could see a time where high schools have an endangered language as the school language. Just like they have a mascot for football, they've got a language that everybody in the high school learns to keep it alive, and that's a way that they, we get on. Why don't we do things like that? Why don't we use our imagination?
Beautiful sentiment. Yeah. And since you brought up translation, I'll just seize that thread of tangent. Robert Frost, I think, again, flippantly and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, said that poetry is what is lost in translation. Respond to that, because, and maybe to balance that sentiment out, I love Tolstoy's statement that if you don't translate literature, it's like blood that stays locked in one part of the body.
Ooh. You gotta get. What do you gotta put out a book of these quotes.
I will. It's gonna happen.
It should have your photos in it. You know, be careful. We're getting rain on the postcards. You know, those are both are true as usual. As Gregory Corso said, if somebody wants you to take this one or that one, always take both of them. You know, so that's the poet's choice. So that's what I'm going to do here, Luce, is take both of them. Poetry is in what's lost in translation. You know, there's a great game, and everybody loves to play it, of what untranslatable word is there in your specific language? You know, hygge in Danish, you know. I'll tell you, nothing is untranslatable. You know, you just say what it means, comfort and cozy. Now, does that mean what it means to a Dane? No. You know, they grew up with this word having this other context, but but you can talk about it, you can translate it, and as far as Tolstoy goes, that's brilliant. You know, I never heard that one. The locked up, blood locked in your body. It's, you know, I loved reading George Saunders' book, Swimming in a Pond in the Rain.
Yeah.
Where it reminds me where we are right now.
Right.
About the Russian short stories. You know, and I'm so glad that they're translated. And I'm so glad that Saunders uses his, you know, years of teaching writing to give us an insight into what he's learned, and that he used terrific Broadway stars to read them. I usually hate actors reading stories, even worse for poetry. So that Neruda film was pretty good with Julia Roberts. Are you kidding me? Reading Neruda? Yeah. And so it was just a way. I'm so glad that I don't have to learn Russian because of what's going on in Ukraine, and can read the translations. You know, hanging out with Serhiy Zhadan, the Ukrainian poet, and having his poems in front of me as translated by friends, Verlana Koch and Wanda Phipps. This is, you know, part of the whole love. My grandparents came from Ukraine. You know, the love for, you know, ununderstandable, this war that's going on right now. But to get Zhadan's poems, and I wrote the introduction to his translations, not because I read them in the original, but because I hung out with him and we performed together, and I often read the English for his poems. He's such a different reader from me. He's a rat-a-tat, rock and roll, straight ahead kind of reader, you know. And I'm all over the joint with what I do.
I like the fact that you mentioned Saunders' book, which I read and really enjoyed, and actually was my gateway drug to finally buckle down and read Tolstoy's War and Peace. Because the story that Saunders presented in that book, Master and Man, I found so genius, so brilliant, so transcendental. So I'd like you to speak for a moment about the humility required. You're 75 years old, but you're still learning, you're still absorbing things. I've been taking a course with Ellen Bass, and she mentions the fact that she has at the entrance to her office this quote from Rilke: "If the angel deigns to come, it will be because you have convinced him, not by tears, but by your humble resolve to be always beginning, to be a beginner."
Yeah, that's beautiful. Ellen Bass is great, and Rilke's great, and you're great, and the sentiment is great.
And Holman's great.
Okay. No, I'm humble. I'm waiting for.
I'm the humblest. I'm humbler. I'm humbler.
I'm waiting for the angel to be. I'm waiting for the male angel to come in. Waiting for him. But, you know, it's Zen mind, beginner's mind.
Yes.
You know, that every time you sit down to meditate is you're starting over, and is there any right way to do it? Well, sit down, hold still, and watch what moves. I mean, I'm an eyes open meditator. So, that's, yeah. And every time, Bill Knott, great poet, said to me once, every poem is a space shot into consciousness. And I honestly believe that. If you're not, Pound said, make it new. And so what we're talking about now is, well, you sit down and you make it new. You begin again, On the other hand is the lineage that you come from, And in orality, making it, you don't make it new. You're simply doing what came to you and passing it on. You're passing it on. That's very, very important. I said to Papa Suso once, who was my griot from Gambia. I say my griot. Anyway, he taught me things. He calls me my king. So what that griot means. So he said, I said, do you do Sanjata, which is the epic poem about the first emperor of Mali? Do you do that poem the same way every time? And he says, Bob, there's only one Sanjata. Of course I do it the same way every time. And I say, aha! I listened to the tape we did yesterday and the tape you did today, and it's completely different. And he said, well, Bob, isn't today completely different from yesterday? Orality is a consciousness. There's a way of thinking there. I said to him, how long is Sanjata? He said, oh, it's long, 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 long. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, if I write this down and give it to an editor, they're going to say, Bob, you can't repeat an adjective. You have to use an adverb to modify it. It's very long, extremely long, totally long, whatever. But but in the oral tradition, you say long, long, long. I said, well, what do you mean by that? Like the Iliad is 450 pages, the Odyssey is 400 pages. How long is Sunjata? And he says 2 days. And you know what I think? I think that if people were still dropping the money into the Korah, that he'd probably go on longer than 2 days. It's with that poem, which has all these characters, just like the Iliad and the Odyssey. The griot's job is to, the lineages of all the people in your audience that go back all the way to the poem. So if this is your audience, you're going to tell them their story about the people in the audience and in the epic that are going to be forefronted. And that's just, you're just telling the story, which means being observant of the audience and bringing all of yourself through the poem to the audience. I think Homer was probably doing something similar, if there was a Homer.
And at last night's reading, in our discussion about it today, you mentioned, oh yeah, that one seemed to go over well. So I asked you if you have a barometer or measurement of some way, in some manner you're trying to keep track of how the audience is responding to your work. How do you navigate that? How do you juggle being in the moment, performing, and at the same moment, gauging audience connection?
That's within the oral tradition. Yeah. The oral consciousness has you do that. That's why there were mnemonics, memory gauges in the brilliant poems, epics that were being done there, so that you can move. So you have little chunks of rhythm that you can toss in while your mind is doing something else. Mm-hmm. And you have whole sections that you can move from poem to poem. Alfred Lord wrote about this in The Singer of Tales. He did the research in the poets that were still working in Homer's tradition there in the Balkans. And it's something. When it is really your consciousness, what I'm involved with is secondary orality, because I'm born into a literacy consciousness context. So you know, we learn with books. Books are the most important. Poems live in books. You know, if you use performance, so-called, in your poems, you are a spoken word artist. You're not even a poet anymore. Wrong. So at least I think, you know, let's give the musicality of poetry back. You know, let's see the importance in the oral tradition. The importance in the written tradition, I agree with too. I've got a ton of books out. Please read them. And but so not only am I gauging the audience on, well, what poem to read next, you know, but also what's working in this poem with this audience. Yeah. So in other words, performance is nothing but an extension of writing. It's an editing process. Yes. If you leave this word out all the time, why is it there? So get rid of it. You know. And where I love right now is when I'm in the part where, if I want to, I can go on. If this is working, why leave it? Why not go on? Which is where the end of the 1990 poem, the 2023 part, I had no idea what I was going to do there until it came to be there. And then it was built in the place where you are, but went out, you know, to the people who brought me to this organization that you're starting, this wonderful idea of the moving center, and, you know, culminated in giving that kind of opening up the history to the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and we're so honored that you're our first guest. Hopefully not our last. And I guess just to close, Bob, what do you suggest to us? What should be the history of our future? What kind of map should we draw for the history of our future as moving center?
You know, I think locus, finding a place, a space, you know, space is the place, as Sun Ra said. And the Bowery Poetry Club exists because a team of 7 investors bought the building. And in New York City, that's how you have the space. Now, space doesn't have to be a single place, you know, but as I hate to call it an organization, even worse, it's institution. Let's call it the idea. As the idea continues, as the idea grows, where is the space that it will grow? This is a very nice space where we are here. And it sounds like it's time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are adoring your visit.
I'm adoring you. Thank you, everybody. All right. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.